The night air in Willow Creek, Ohio, was unusually still, the kind of stillness that made you feel like the world was holding its breath. The Monroe house sat at the edge of the old mill road, where the woods thickened and the air smelled like pine and dust. Grace Monroe, 24, sat on the porch steps with her younger brother Ethan, who was 17 and full of that restless energy that made him both fearless and reckless. They had always been inseparable. Since their father's death years ago and their mother's gradual retreat into bitterness and vodka, Grace had practically raised Ethan herself. He was her only reason for staying in that town. Every dream she had, nursing school, moving to Chicago, starting a new life, was built around making sure Ethan got out first. That night he looked at her with his crooked grin. "Don't wait up," he said, "just going to hang out at the old quarry with some of the guys." Grace frowned. "Those same guys that got you in trouble last month." Ethan chuckled. "Relax, Gracie, it's just a bonfire, I'll be home by midnight." Grace studied his face, the easy smile, the confidence, and felt that tiny cold twist in her stomach. She had learned to trust those feelings. "Promise me you'll call if something feels off." He gave her that mock solemn nod, Scout's honor. She laughed, tossed him the car keys, and watched him drive off into the dark. It would be the last time she saw him alive. By morning the police were at her door. The knock was hard, official and terrifying. "Miss Monroe," one of them asked, "we're sorry to inform you there's been an accident." Grace's heart stopped. They said Ethan's car had gone off the road near the quarry, a single vehicle crash. The car had caught fire, he hadn't made it out. But even as the words poured over her, something didn't make sense. Ethan was careful, he never drank much. He hated that winding quarry road. And when she saw his phone returned to her in a plastic bag, the last text on it was strange. A single message sent at 11:38 p.m. "They know I think I'm in trouble." Grace showed it to the officers. They glanced at it, murmured something about teenagers and drama, and filed it away as undetermined cause. She buried Ethan 3 days later. It rained the whole time, and half the town came, classmates, teachers, even Sheriff Dalton, who gave her that sympathetic but distant look of someone who'd already decided it was an accident. After the funeral, Grace stood by the grave long after everyone had left. Her shoes sank into the wet earth. "You didn't die by accident," she whispered. "I swear to you, Ethan, I'll find out who did this." That was the night she made her silent promise. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and frustration. Everyone told her to move on, even her mother, between drinks. "You're seeing ghosts, Grace," she slurred one evening. "Ethan made mistakes. Let it go." But Grace couldn't. She started digging. First, she went to Ethan's school. His locker was still sealed. She convinced the janitor to open it, said she needed closure. Inside, she found a half-filled notebook. Between algebra scribbles and random doodles, there was a page that caught her attention. Dalton's son, something off about the shipments at the mill, money changing hands, told him I'd go to the cops if he didn't stop. Her hands shook. Sheriff Dalton's son, Ryan Dalton, had been in Ethan's class. He was the town's golden boy football captain, rich, untouchable. And his father, the sheriff, ruled Willow Creek like it was his own private kingdom. Grace took the notebook straight to the station. They brushed her off. "Conspiracy theories," one officer said. "Grief talking," another added. That's when she realized the truth. The people who were supposed to help her were the ones covering it up. For months, Grace worked double shifts at the diner and spent her nights watching. She started piecing things together, whispers about the Daltons running an illegal drug ring through the old mill, using the trucks her brother used to load during his summer job. She found Ethan's old friend, Kyle Mason, one evening behind the bar. His eyes darted nervously. "I can't talk about it, Grace," he said. "It's bigger than you think." "You owe Ethan that much," she pressed. Kyle's jaw tightened. "They warned him, Grace. He said he'd report them if they didn't stop. He didn't think they'd actually." He stopped, swallowed hard. "Please don't ask me more, they'll come after you too." But she already knew enough. That night, Grace sat on her bed staring at Ethan's photo. "They think I'm weak because I'm just his sister," she murmured. "They're wrong." She opened her laptop. She started documenting everything: names, dates, connections. She taught herself about digital tracing, financial forensics, and surveillance. It became her second life. By spring, Grace had gathered enough threads to see the full picture. The Daltons were using the mill's shipments to traffic opioids into the county. Ethan had discovered it while working there and confronted Ryan, threatening to expose him. The accident had been a warning to anyone else who might talk. But Grace wasn't anyone else. She wanted justice, not through the system that failed her but on her own terms. Her first move was subtle. She started volunteering at the mayor's re-election campaign, where Sheriff Dalton often appeared. She smiled, acted polite, offered to help with press releases. No one suspected the waitress with the quiet eyes and gentle smile. She used that access to listen. Every conversation, every whisper, she stored away. She learned that the Daltons were expanding their operation into another county. She learned names, suppliers, handlers, fake companies. And when she finally had enough evidence, she didn't go to the local police. She went federal. She mailed an anonymous dossier, full of recordings, financial trails, and testimonies, to the DEA and the FBI. But she wasn't done. She wanted the town to see them fall, to feel the shock she had felt when she lost her brother. The night it happened, Willow Creek was hosting its annual summer fair. The mayor was giving a speech. Sheriff Dalton stood proudly beside him. His son, Ryan, fresh from college, was shaking hands and posing for photos. Grace stood at the edge of the crowd, her face calm, her phone in her hand. At precisely 7:42 p.m. the big screen behind the stage flickered. Then one by one, images appeared, photos, ledgers, hidden camera footage. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People saw Ryan Dalton handing off packages in the mill, the sheriff exchanging envelopes with a trucker, audio clips of threats, everything Grace had collected. Chaos erupted. Reporters, police, and stunned townspeople shouted. Sheriff Dalton turned pale. Grace watched from a distance, her expression unreadable. When she saw federal agents walking toward the stage, she knew the promise was kept. She whispered, "This is for you, Ethan." And then she turned and walked away, the sound of sirens echoing behind her. The town of Willow Creek would never forget that night. Within 24 hours, news vans lined Main Street. The Dalton family, once the town's pride, became the symbol of everything rotten beneath Willow Creek's polite smiles. Sheriff Dalton was arrested, Ryan fled, and the town turned on itself. Grace Monroe became the quiet mystery. No one could prove she'd been behind the public reveal, but rumors spread fast. People whispered in diners and hardware stores, saying she must have had help, that maybe someone from outside had done it. Grace said nothing. She kept her job at the diner, kept her head down, but her eyes were sharper, now colder. The fire that had burned in her heart since Ethan's death had become something steady and unstoppable. But peace never lasts long in a town built on secrets. 2 weeks after the arrests, Grace started getting calls. No number, no voice, just silence on the other end. Sometimes she'd hear faint breathing, sometimes a click, then nothing. At first she thought it was a mistake, maybe reporters. But then she found the note slipped under her door. "You should have left it alone. You don't know who you're dealing with." Grace stared at the paper for a long time. The handwriting was rough, hurried. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. Fear had died the same night Ethan did. She folded the note neatly and placed it beside her brother's photo on the dresser. "Looks like they're scared, Ethan," she said softly. That night she checked her locks twice, loaded her father's old revolver and went back to work. The next morning the news broke. Sheriff Dalton had hung himself in his jail cell. At least that's what the county press release said. Grace didn't buy it. She knew power didn't just disappear, it shifted hands. Someone bigger was protecting the operation, someone who didn't want Dalton alive to talk. She started digging again, this time following the trail beyond Willow Creek. She called Kyle Mason, Ethan's old friend, to meet her at the truck stop diner off I-70. When he arrived, he looked thinner, haunted. "They're not done," he said immediately before even sitting. "You think it's over, Grace, it's not. The Daltons were middlemen. There's someone else behind all this, someone named Cole Vance." "Who is he?" Kyle rubbed his hands. "He runs logistics for a transport company out of Cincinnati. Real business up front, but underneath, he's the one who moves everything. He's got cops, mayors, and even some feds in his pocket. Dalton was working for him." Grace leaned forward. "Did Ethan ever mention him?" Kyle hesitated. "He tried to get proof. The night he died, he said he was going to meet someone who could give him Vance's name." Grace's breath caught. So that's who killed him. Kyle nodded slowly. Grace, if you go after Vance, you'll be walking into hell. Grace gave a faint smile. Then I'll bring gasoline. The next few months turned her from a waitress into a ghost. She quit her job quietly, sold her car, took a temp position at a freight company, Vance Logistics. She falsified her resume, used a new name, Grace Dawson. Inside the massive warehouse in Cincinnati, she moved among men who spoke in half-sentences and coded slang. She learned their rhythms, their shortcuts, their fear. She kept her phone hidden in her locker, its voice recorder running during every shift. She noted every name, every truck, every route. And slowly she began to see Cole Vance himself. He wasn't like the others. Clean-cut, expensive suits, charming smile, the kind of man who could win a room and poison it at the same time. He talked to his employees like they were friends, but the way they stiffened when he entered said otherwise. One afternoon he stopped at her loading bay. "You're new," he said, eyes sharp but friendly. "Grace, right?" "Yes, sir." He smiled. "You've got good work habits. Keep it up and you might move up faster than you think." She nodded politely, hiding the burning hate in her chest. Every night she went back to her small rented apartment, pored over her notes, and added another piece to the puzzle. She wasn't just collecting evidence anymore, she was building a trap. One night she saw Ryan Dalton again. It was by chance, or maybe fate. He was at a bar on the riverfront, half drunk, talking too loud. She watched from a corner booth as he bragged to two men about how his father had taken the fall, and how Vance would take care of him soon. Grace's hands clenched. She waited until he stumbled outside alone, then she followed. "Ryan," she called. He turned, startled, and froze when he saw her. "Grace Monroe," he laughed weakly. "Didn't expect you to show your face here." She stepped closer. "You killed my brother." His smirk faltered. "That wasn't supposed to happen." Her voice was ice, but it did. He backed up slightly. "Look, Vance made the call. He said your brother was going to the cops. I didn't." Grace grabbed him by the collar. "Say his name again." "Vance," he gasped. "Cole Vance, he's the one you want, not me." Grace stared into his eyes, the same cold arrogance that had mocked her months ago. "You were there," she whispered. "You watched him die." "I didn't touch him, I swear." She let go abruptly. "You'll get your justice too, Ryan, just not today." And she walked away, leaving him shaking in the alley. The next morning, Ryan Dalton's body was found floating in the river. Grace knew she hadn't killed him, but someone had, and that someone wanted to send her a message: stop digging. Instead, she went deeper. She broke into the company's records after hours, copying shipping manifests and financial documents onto a flash drive. She found files marked confidential, invoices tied to fake businesses across 3 states. Then one night she stumbled upon something worse, a file with Ethan's name on it. Inside was a brief internal report. Subject: Ethan Monroe, threat level moderate. Action contained, no further monitoring necessary. Her hands shook so hard she dropped the mouse. Contained, that's what they called murder. Grace sat there in the dark office, the glow of the monitor reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. "You wanted this quiet," she whispered. "Now I'll make it loud." The next phase of her revenge took precision. She leaked pieces of information to journalists anonymously, stories about corruption, drug trafficking, embezzlement. Each leak led the media closer to Cole Vance's empire. She even reached out to the same FBI agent who'd taken her anonymous file months ago, Agent Rebecca Hall. Using an encrypted email, she sent evidence pointing to Vance Logistics. But Grace knew Vance wasn't going down easily. He started suspecting leaks inside his company, security tightened, employees were interrogated. One night Grace found her locker broken open, her things scattered. She knew then that they were onto her. She packed her things that night, grabbed her files and disappeared. 3 days later, her apartment exploded. The fire marshal said it was a gas leak. Grace knew better. She watched from across the street, hood up, as the building burned, the flames reflecting in her eyes. "You tried to burn me out," she whispered, "but you just fed the fire." She moved again, this time to a safe house owned by a friend of Kyle's outside Columbus. She changed her number, her look, her tactics. If Cole Vance wanted a war, she would bring one. She hacked into his company's online systems, leaking payroll records, customer lists, and tax fraud evidence to the press. She sent anonymous tips to federal agencies across multiple states. The more she revealed, the more desperate he became. Soon Cole Vance's empire started cracking. His clients fled, his partners turned, and his name began to appear on federal watch lists. But Grace wasn't satisfied with headlines. She wanted him to know who had destroyed him. One night she called him directly. He answered on the third ring. Cole Vance speaking. Hello, Mr. Vance. Her voice was calm, unrecognizable. Remember Ethan Monroe? Silence, then a low, dangerous tone. Who is this? The sister, she said softly. He laughed, but there was no humor. You think you can scare me, little girl? I don't need to scare you, Grace replied. I just need to watch you lose everything. You're making a mistake, he snapped. You don't know what I'm capable of. I know exactly what you're capable of, she said. You killed my brother. There was a pause, then he said quietly, You should have died in that fire. Click. Grace stared at her phone, heartbeat steady. Now it's personal, she whispered. By the end of that year, Vance's entire operation was collapsing. Dozens of arrests, seized accounts, a federal warrant for his arrest. He went underground, running from his own men. Grace followed every whisper, every news report, every lead. And one night she found him. In a crumbling warehouse on the outskirts of St. Louis, Cole Vance stood surrounded by what was left of his empire, half-packed boxes, burning files, desperation in his eyes. Grace stepped out of the shadows. You don't look so powerful now, she said. He turned, shocked. You. She leveled the revolver at him. You killed a boy who trusted you, you destroyed families, this is where it ends. Vance's voice trembled slightly. You won't shoot me. Grace smiled faintly. You're right. She tossed something at his feet, a small flash drive. That's everything left of you. I sent copies to the FBI an hour ago. Enjoy the rest of your short, miserable life. Then she walked away. Behind her, she heard him scream and throw something against the wall. She didn't turn back. As dawn broke over St. Louis, Grace stood by the river, the morning light soft on her face. For the first time since Ethan's death, she breathed without pain. But deep down she knew the fire would never really die. Because revenge, once lit, never truly goes out. The arrest made national news. Cole Vance, multi-million-dollar logistics mogul, charged with conspiracy, money laundering and murder. Every channel replayed the footage, the moment federal agents cornered him at a private airstrip, his expensive coat torn, his hands trembling as they cuffed him. Cameras flashed like lightning. Grace watched from a cheap motel room in rural Illinois, the glow of the TV casting light over her tired face. She hadn't slept in days, but she didn't need to. The sound of Vance shouting at the reporters, "You don't know who I am," was all the rest she needed. She whispered to the empty room, "I know exactly who you are." For months after the story spread, investigations widened. Dozens of law enforcement officers, local officials and businessmen were indicted. Willow Creek's old mill shut down for good. The town's golden era ended in disgrace. Grace could have disappeared for good. She had the money, she'd quietly withdrawn the small inheritance her father left and could start over anywhere, but something inside her still ached. Revenge had been her purpose, but it hadn't filled the hole Ethan's death left. She needed closure, not just justice in headlines, but peace in her heart. That meant going home. The drive back to Willow Creek took 5 hours. The roads looked smaller now, the trees thinner, the town quieter. The once bustling main street was lined with boarded shops and for sale signs. At the diner where she used to work, the waitress, old Mrs. Cranford, nearly dropped her tray when she saw Grace walk in. "Lord above," she said, hand over her chest, "we thought you'd vanished." Grace smiled faintly. "Guess I did for a while." People stared, whispered. They remembered the quiet girl whose brother had died, the one who'd never stopped asking questions. They didn't say her name loudly, but the look said it all. She was right. When she left a tip and turned toward the door, Mrs. Cranford caught her hand. "Your brother would be proud," she said softly. Grace's throat tightened. "Thank you." The Monroe house was as she'd left it, half empty, fading, heavy with silence. Her mother was gone now. She'd moved out months after Ethan's death, chasing some new start that never came. The neighbors said she was in a rehab facility out west. Grace walked through the house slowly. Dust clung to everything. Ethan's room was still painted blue, his old posters curling at the edges. She sat on his bed, the springs creaking beneath her, and let herself cry, truly cry, for the first time since the night he died. "I did it," she whispered. "I kept my promise." Through the window, the sunset painted the trees gold, and for a fleeting second she could almost hear his laugh. But peace, as always, was temporary. 2 days later, Grace received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single line written on expensive paper. "You took down one branch, the roots are still alive." Her blood ran cold. It wasn't signed, but the typeface was familiar, the same corporate stationery she'd seen at Vance Logistics. She burned the note in the sink and watched the paper curl into ash. "Not again," she muttered. But deep down, she knew the fight wasn't over. There were still people, powerful ones, who'd made money off Ethan's death and wanted to make sure no one else talked. Grace had 2 choices, run or finish it. She chose the latter. She called Agent Rebecca Hall, now leading the federal task force. They'd never spoken directly before, but Grace's emails had guided much of the case. When Rebecca answered, her voice was cautious. "Who is this?" "Grace Monroe." A pause, then, "The sister." "Yes." Rebecca's tone softened. "You did good work, Grace, more than you know. Without your intel, we'd never have cracked it open." "There's more," Grace said. "Someone's still out there. Someone sent me a warning." Rebecca hesitated. "We've suspected as much. The Vance network was bigger than even he realized. We're still uncovering partners, lawyers, investors, maybe even federal contacts." "Tell me what you need," Grace said. Rebecca exhaled. "Honestly, someone who's not afraid to walk where badges can't, but it's dangerous." Grace smiled faintly. "Danger doesn't scare me anymore." And just like that, the woman who'd once been a grieving sister became an unofficial operative, a civilian consultant, working quietly with a small team to expose the remaining links. For the next few months, Grace helped map the money flow. Offshore accounts, dummy corporations, old allies of Vance trying to rebuild under new names. She used every skill she'd learned, digging, tracing, staying invisible. But in her heart, the mission had changed. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making sure no other brother or sister went through what she had. Still, fate wasn't done testing her. One night she got a call from Rebecca. "We found something," the agent said grimly. "Vance didn't act alone. His investor, a man named Stephen Ward, is the real architect. He funded the logistics company and he's still free." Grace clenched her jaw. "Where is he?" "New York, untouchable for now." Grace looked out her window at the dark woods beyond the house. "No one's untouchable." A month later, she was in Manhattan, hair darker, wardrobe sharper, name changed again. She tracked Stephen Ward to a charity gala at the Astoria Tower, where the city's elite drank champagne under chandeliers. Grace entered in a black evening gown, blending in perfectly. Ward was in his late 50s, distinguished, surrounded by power brokers. He smiled for cameras, shook hands with senators, the picture of philanthropy. Grace approached him with a calm confidence that surprised even her. "Mr. Ward," she said, extending a hand, "big fan of your foundation." He smiled. "Always good to meet supporters, and you are?" "Grace Dawson," she said smoothly, the same alias she'd used before. They chatted politely, his charm effortless. But she saw it, the same flicker of calculation in his eyes she'd seen in Vance's, the same rot beneath the polish. When the speeches began, Grace slipped away to his office suite upstairs. She plugged a small drive into his computer and downloaded everything, offshore bank data, correspondence, blackmail files. Then she left, unnoticed. By dawn, those files were sitting in the inbox of every major investigative journalist in the country. That evening, the headlines hit like thunder. Prominent businessman Stephen Ward linked to nationwide drug conspiracy. Justice Department expands investigation, arrests imminent. Grace watched it unfold from a quiet cafe across the street, sipping coffee like any other stranger. When Ward was taken away in handcuffs 3 days later, she allowed herself a smile. That was the final chain, the last piece of Ethan's story. Weeks later, Grace returned to Willow Creek one last time. The town had begun rebuilding, new sheriff, new mill owners, cautious hope. The old fairgrounds had been turned into a memorial park. At the center stood a bronze plaque, in memory of Ethan Monroe, whose courage sparked change. Grace stood before it, her reflection glinting in the metal. She placed a single white rose at its base and whispered, "It's over, Ethan, you can rest now." A breeze rustled through the trees, and for a moment she could almost feel his hand on her shoulder. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Grace sat on the porch of the old Monroe house. The air smelled like pine again, just like the night it all began. She opened Ethan's notebook, the one she'd found in his locker, and flipped to the last page. She added her own line beneath his handwriting. "Justice isn't always in the courtroom. Sometimes it's in the fire that refuses to go out." She closed the book gently. The cicadas sang in the trees. Somewhere in the distance, kids laughed, a new generation growing up free of the corruption that had nearly destroyed their town. Grace smiled to herself. The pain would always be there, but so would the strength it forged. She wasn't the same woman who'd once begged the sheriff for answers. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the storm that swept through lies and left truth standing. Months later, she received one last message, an encrypted email from Rebecca Hall. Subject: the promise. Body: your information helped us dismantle 3 more networks. We're calling it Operation Silent Promise after your brother. Thank you, Grace. Grace read it twice, then closed her laptop. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but this time they weren't of sorrow. She looked out at the horizon, endless, open, waiting. Then she stood, grabbed her jacket, and walked down the road toward whatever came next. Behind her the house stood quiet, but its windows glowed softly in the sunset, as if Ethan's spirit lingered, proud, watching her move forward. And for the first time, Grace Monroe truly smiled. Because the promise she'd made on that cold night so long ago had finally been kept.